Hello.
Thank you.
Everyone settles in here. Hello and welcome to the William H. Hannon Library's 4th annual LMU Speaks. I feel it. It's exciting. I'm on staff here in information technology. My name is Lynn Mitchell Parrish. I'm the manager of business operations and other stuff. So that's it. Was it? Yeah, that's it. That's as technical as it gets. Other stuff. And I am delighted to be your MC this evening. So I apologize in advance. It seems like I get a cold every year at this time, and I have moved just slightly away from what I call the B. Arthur phase of the illness, which my voice drops about 12 octaves. I speak in only snappy one-liners, and I look at everyone like this. But enough about me. Who has been to this event before? Show of hands. All right, really? Okay. Any 4 for 4? Anyone? Yes, of course, yes. Any other major followers here? 4 for 4? No one. So everyone else a first timer? Or you just like to raise your hand? So first timer? The math is not really working out. Okay, yes, okay, awesome. Yeah. Are you really here for the speakers, or did you just see the wine and niblets and like stick my head in there for a second? I do it too. No judgment. It's a very important element of any event on campus. In fact, do we have a house red that pairs well with Mucinex? I would be very interested in that offering. You didn't know this was a stand-up. Well, a mistake in giving me a mic, that's what happens. Actually, this is a really cool event. So you're here on a good night, and so many first-time people. We hope to see you again. And again, it's really cool, right? I mean, this is fun. Always afterward, though, we encourage you to stick around. And we've actually built this time into the event to just kind of hang out, chat with everybody, ask questions of the speakers, ask questions of each other. If you need to ask me how to process your RMP, I can handle that, honestly. Yeah, this is true. I have to leave, though. No, it's cool. Seriously, if you're able to hang out, it's going to be fun. And finally, welcome to our speakers tonight. Yeah. We have, hang on just a second, I'll get to you. Anyway, it seems like, is she ever going to stop talking? No. Because this thing works and I'm taking it with me. We have 4 speakers tonight, 2 students, which is super cool. So let's give it up to the students. Each year, our speakers are comprised of students, staff, and faculty. And I'll introduce them all individually before they speak. And we ask them to come and share just a true personal story, and we give them a common theme. And so since most people are new here, for example, first year the theme was the fork in the road, which is cool. I spoke at that one and I was like, I have a story where I literally happened upon an actual fork in the road. This is kind of weird for me. I'm dying to tell that story. It worked out. I'm from Oklahoma, so it's one of the less objectionable things one happens upon in the road. You're from Florida, you get it, you know. The next year, we went off the rails. That was fun. Last year, It's Complicated, and we did hear some wonderfully complicated stories, and we're still thinking about those. And this year, we might be shifting the theme just a little, kind of away from the cosmic chaos and more towards the quiet bravery, I think, as we present to you our 4th installment of LMU Speaks, The Unspeakable. So thank you for being here. So I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker tonight, who is chomping at the bit, which is awesome. I love the enthusiasm. He's a first-year undergraduate student. Please welcome Drew Cox.
Good evening. My name is Drew Cox. I am a freshman at LMU with an undeclared major. I currently live in Los Angeles, where I stay with my mom, Naomi Cox, who is a stockbroker, and my dad, Dwayne Cox, who is an anesthesiologist. They both are a very important part of my life, and I owe everything to them. I also have an older brother named Dwayne Cox II, who graduated from LMU last year with the double major of history and screenwriting. Growing up, we always played video games together, in which he would beat me in Battlefront and Rebel Strike, Star Wars games, and I will always beat him in Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. But now we enjoy playing single-player games together, in which we will work as a team, so that when he wins, I win. But now I enjoy various things, like I'm into physical fitness. More specifically, I'm into yoga, strength training, and running. I also like to perform Zumba, and I enjoy watching animated films, comedies, and thrillers. I'm also a member of TLC here. And for those who are unaware of what TLC is a 2-week summer program in which first-year students of African descent learn more about their identities. And they learn how to utilize campus resources in order to maximize achievement. That gives you all a little bit of an overview as to who I am. Oh, and by the way, I am diagnosed with autism. Tonight, I will share with you all the clinical definition of autism, along with my own definition. Next, I will be sharing how autism has impacted my personal life and my family life, along with the time in which I first discovered that I had autism. Finally, I will be covering my hopes and dreams will be in the future and what I will want others to know. According to the Autism Speaks website, autism is defined as a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges of social skills, repetitive behaviors, nonverbal communication, etc. That definition of autism has been widely accepted by the general public and was used as a baseline for the common people to label others who met that set criteria. One of the biggest preconceived notions of people on the spectrum was that all people who are on the spectrum are sensitive to bright lights, loud noises, etc. But in reality, some of these individuals who are diagnosed on the spectrum are more resilient to these conditions than others. As I grow more self-aware, I became physically adaptable to almost any environmental setting. Although my parents were the first ones to discover that I had autism back when I was in middle school, the moment I truly realized that was the case was when I was at the age of 18, in which I attended Dr. Grill's Black Psychology course during TLC. And so when the question, when did you realize you were black, came up, it instantly triggered the realization that autism has impacted my life. Before my experiences at TLC, however, I had to overcome many academic challenges due to my autism. 3 of the biggest obstacles for me were disorganized writing, challenges with reading comprehension, and impaired verbal communication. In an effort to turn my academic weaknesses into strengths, I was enrolled in a few learning institutions, such as the Lindenboom Bell, and had to undergo ABA therapy. Both were responsible for improving my literacy skills. And as a result, autism has not only affected me academically, but also socially. I will often isolate myself from others because I had trouble making social connections as well as maintaining them. And because of that, I'll become dissatisfied with myself and lay low from the crowd. But in my sophomore year of high school, I decided to join a program known as CARD, which stands for the Center for Autism-Related Disorders. Within that program, I spent 2 weeks in trying to enhance my social skills. After those 2 weeks, my social life has significantly changed, but I still didn't see the value within myself. During my experiences at TLC, however, I come to realize that my uniqueness is something to be proud of, not something to be bitter towards. Aside from embracing the fact that I had autism, family life to me is the most essential part of being successful in whatever field I decide to pursue in. I have an older brother who is also always very supportive of me, along with a mom and dad who is also very supportive of me, who will support me in and outside school. And I can always count on them in whatever serves my best interests. Family life also had a changing impact in how I saw myself initially to how I see myself in the present. Therefore, I went from trying to obtain validation from others to trying to build my own self-worth in order to nurture my own self-esteem. And if it wasn't for the constant, unconditional support of my parents and of my brother, I would not be where I am today. For those who are not fully informed about my experience with autism, I want everyone in this room to know a couple of things about me. First off, I have a very specific way of performing certain tasks. I like to have a template to work from for any different task, and I also would like to be given a set deadline for when that task is due. The second thing you guys should know about me is that I prefer one-on-one conversations with a small group of people rather than with a large group of people. And the reason being is that it is easier for me to invest time and energy in getting to know that one person and responding with that one person's feedback than it is to trying to find a social cue without disrupting the flow of the conversation. Finally, I want us to know that every single organization I attended and every single ABA therapy session I partake in served as a booster in discovering what I am truly capable of. Finally, at the end of this speech, I want everyone in this room to walk out with the mentality of seeing individuals on the spectrum not as troubled individuals, but as individuals who may have certain challenges, but also have certain talents. I would want us in this room to know that I truly care from the bottom of my heart that you guys will know what autism is and how the general public came up with the definition of what they think autism is versus how those who are actually on the spectrum came up with a definition of what they know autism is. And I will want everyone in this room to just get to know the person with ASD or any other disability for that matter, to connect with him or her in a deeper way. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. See, this is a great thing. So we're going to move right on to our next speaker. She's also an undergraduate student with the School of Film and Television. Oh, that's interesting.
I think it's
I'll have to stand over here. Okay. So I'll stand this way. Please welcome Natalie Christensen.
Hi, everyone. Okay, thank you. My name is Natalie Christensen. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Natalie Christensen, and I'm a first-year film student in the School of Film and Television. When people ask me where I got my start in creating films and other art, I don't usually talk about my own trials or how these things affect the work I create. So I wanted to take this time to talk about the reasons I do what I do that aren't so easy to talk about. But I sort of wanted to preface everything by saying that I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up running through forests, building tree houses, swimming in the river, So it kind of sounds like I grew up in like a 70s like cheesy movie. But as with any life, there were moments that challenged me and transformed me into who I am today as I grew up. And when I was told what the prompt for this speech was, it really took me back to 9th grade, because that was really a time in my life where I felt really voiceless. I was a really anxious and depressed person when I was 14. I had obsessive compulsive disorder, and dealing with that while just starting high school was really challenging for me, because I really wanted to make new friends at my new school, but I found it really hard to maintain stability day to day. There were some days where I was so anxious that I would just lay in the nurse's office during class. And there was this one class that I had that year that I remember really vividly. It was my biology class, and it was really disorganized and unfocused. Kids would just walk around or yell at the teacher, and it was a huge class, way bigger than any class in high school should ever be. And I had a few friends in the class, and there was this one guy who sat in front of me, and we would kind of make fun of each other, go back and forth. It was kind of fun. It was like the nature of our relationship. We would just mess with each other. And this one day for class, we had a substitute teacher. And as you can imagine, with a class that was already this disorganized, that day we were just kind of walking around, hanging out, doing nothing. And me and the guy who sat in front of me were going back and forth and like making fun of each other as usual, messing with each other. And I walked to the back of the classroom to get something out of my backpack, and I turned around, and he came up behind me and he forcefully touched me in an inappropriate place. And so, it was really hurtful, like I was really humiliated right when it happened. And it happened in front of everyone, So I just felt really frozen. I didn't know what to do. And my friends in my class told me that I shouldn't report it to the school because they overheard him threatening me for later after it happened. And I decided to go to my guidance counselor anyway after it happened that day, and I explained to her what had happened to me. And she told me that there wasn't really much that the school could do, but that it was up to me whether I wanted to report it or not. And so I decided not to report it because I felt like it wasn't bad enough to report it, and I also just felt like I didn't want to make things worse because of the threat. So I didn't report it, and one of the things that really stood out to me, though, about that day was that none of my friends that were in the class when it happened did anything about it, They didn't tell them to leave me alone, and they didn't offer to walk me to my next class, And that really hurt me, and even if they didn't know me at all in that class, their silence really spoke volumes to me. And there's this MLK quote I saw when I was walking through the halls of LMU the other day, and it said that, in the end, we remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And I feel like that's really something we should all consider, and not just the silence of our friends, but the silence of those who may not even know us, but that just decide that issues aren't their problem, or the problem of anyone they know. And, growing up in Richmond, as someone who's half Asian, I never really felt like there was a group that I totally identified with ethnically. But something that I realized as I grew up was that just because I don't have the lived experience of someone doesn't mean that I can't empathize with them. It doesn't mean I can't take action on issues that affect them. I felt like if something needed to be made and it hadn't been made, then I should do it. So last year, my senior year in high school, I created a film about these monuments on Monument Avenue in Richmond. And on Monument Avenue, there are Confederate monuments, and there's a monument to Arthur Ashe at the end of the avenue. And for the film, I interviewed the sculptor of the Arthur Ashe Monument, Paul Di Pasquale, as well as the civil rights activist and scholar Anna Edwards, who's based out of Richmond. And I'm really proud of the way that the documentary was received by Richmond. It won first place at the Oliver Whitehill Social Justice Competition, and it screened at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, so I was really proud of that. And one thing that came up in both interviews for the film was this idea of having an open facilitated dialogue about the monuments. So I held facilitation at my high school, Godwin, about the monuments. And I specifically remember this one man who attended. He was an older white man, and when we opened up the dialogue to everyone, he talked about how this was the first time and that he really started challenging his beliefs and how he wanted to learn more and become better. And this is someone who likely grew up in a time in Richmond where lost cause rhetoric was just a part of textbooks. And he's someone who, before challenging his beliefs, I probably would have considered him my enemy, right? So it really compelled me to want to create more films like that one, because I realized that film can change the way that someone thinks. And I think that's really powerful. I think that's really powerful. Sorry, I just like. So now I go to LMU, a film school I chose because of the way that it values justice. And I've been working at ethnic intercultural services, creating events about issues that affect the Asian community. And I've also been working as an intercultural facilitator, which has taught me more than I could have imagined about new perspectives, conscious communication, and effective ways to take action on issues. So these are really exciting times for me. And one thing I've learned throughout my growth as an artist and an activist is that all of these issues are so intersectional. Every single one affects the other one, and all of these issues pertain to every single one of us. Sexism is an issue that doesn't just affect women, it affects men too. Institutionalized racism affects every single person of every ethnicity in some way. So basically these things are everyone's problem. I know that the guy who hurt me in 9th grade must have been hurting too. And I don't know for sure, and it was important for me to realize that what happened was about him and the system that he grew up in, and not just about me. I don't know for sure, but maybe he was in pain. Maybe he was scared. And I'm not saying there's an excuse for what he did, but humanizing him has helped me process this whole thing. He's not a monster because I feel like that gives him more power over me. He's a human being and he did something wrong, but there's more to it than him just being a bad person, because I feel like people aren't black and white like that. I wanted to speak about what happened to me because I feel like at that time in my life, not only did I need help, a voice, and compassion, but I think he did too. I used to look back in my life and I would see a series of enemies and friends, bigots and progressives. But I've just sort of come to realize that everyone is connected to me and no one is separate from me. When I don't separate his humanity from mine, it gives me peace. Someone who has a different identity than me is still connected to me, and that's not something I can change. And now that I know what it feels like to be voiceless, I know that if I don't use my voice to empower the voice of others, I lose my voice again, because my voice values justice. So I ask you to question today what your voice values. Does your voice value the issues that you perceive to be only those of yours and your friends? Or does your voice value the issues which harm your so-called enemies too? Because those who are lacking in love are those who need it the most, and those are the people that I want to reach more than anything.
Wow.
So sorry, I was afraid that was going to happen, and yes, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Restore. I apologize. I had to step out. I'm so sorry. So now I introduce our next speaker. He is a staff member in marketing and communications. He's our campus photographer. Please welcome John Rao.
Is this working? No?
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Wow, you guys are amazing. Kind of encapsulates how I feel as a photographer here a lot of times. I'm the imposter, documenting the amazing people and the amazing stories. Thank you for sharing. That was really powerful. So I am the university photographer. My name is John Rao. I've been here 10 years. I come to you from a small town in Florida called Lowell. It's a very personal thing to me. It's also my middle name. Lucky for me, I wasn't raised in a nearby town of Zuber or Spar or Reddick, spelled like it sounds, or Wakahuta. So I'm John Lowell Rao, and that's who I am. I'm sure you're already thinking Florida, the crazy state, the weird people. You're right, we're here, and we're still weird. I'm just going to give you a few factoids before I start. Elementary and middle school, I went to a segregation academy. Anybody know what a segregation academy is? I didn't until I was an adult. Basically, segregation academies popped up in the South as an answer to integration, so that white families didn't have to send their children to an integrated school. Ocala Christian Academy, home of the Crusaders, was where I spent the first 8 years of my education, and that's where lovely universities like Bob Jones, and Oral Roberts, and Liberty Baptist come to recruit students. So I kind of will leave you with that. My high school, we had tractor pulls in the summer. We had a smoking and dipping area for students. I still don't understand because I think the age was 18, which maybe means we had a lot of 19-year-olds going to high school. I'm not sure. And we raffled off shotguns at the halftimes of my high school football games. So this is pretty much where I'm from. And yes, the railroad tracks literally separated the white from the black populations. So basically, Lowell's an intersection of two roads, Old 441 and County Road 329A. Some fancy names. There wasn't even a light, just a couple of stop signs. On the western side of that intersection was a convenience store, and opposite that was a post office that was run by my grandmother. And my grandmother and grandfather lived in the house next door. I don't know if that makes her a postmaster or a postmistress, I'm not quite sure. However, she was way ahead of her time. She was college educated, having gone to the Georgia State College for Women in the 1920s, and was responsible for the mail. And before they built the post office for her, she delivered the mail out of a tiny slot in the back door of her house. I have a lot of vivid memories of going to the post office and helping her sort the mail, which federally I don't think is probably okay, especially when you're about this small. But we drank Coca-Cola out of little glass bottles that came out of the vending machine and ate bugles, and it was a very special time. She was well loved in the community. People went to the post office to gossip, and even though she died when I was 5, I have some pretty vivid memories, and I think she shaped a lot of who and what I am. My grandfather, her husband, was an alcoholic, sat in the same chair every day. I don't think ever had a conversation with me my entire life, but I vividly remember a tin of Anison that sat on the arm of his chair and how I would play with the tin of Anison. He lived in his wife's shadow, and I think was a very, very unhappy man, was an itinerant farmer, and was well beneath her education level. My grandmother died when I was 5 in a car accident. She and my great aunt were hit head on by a lime rock truck that was coming up a hill, and the truck was in the wrong lane. Lime rock truck, that's probably not something everybody sees or talks about regularly. Lowell was dotted, it wasn't dotted, it was over the Florida aquifer, which is basically like porous lime rock. And so there were mines in the area to mine this lime rock, which was mainly used for construction and road building projects. But for me, I was lucky enough that some of that lime rock was driven right down the road next to my house and dumped off at the kitty white cat litter plant, where it was lovingly turned into cat litter, and dust permeated the air all over my house and in the yard, and it was a pretty noisy and disturbing thing to watch cat litter being made. So if you left those grandparents' house and continued walking down the road, you'd eventually come to my house and my father's parents' house. We lived next door to each other, adjacent to about 20 acres that were used for livestock and crops. In fact, this was before I was born, but my mom has a vivid memory of a walking out one morning and finding an entire herd of goats, including all of the babies, had been slaughtered by a pack of wild dogs. I have memories of my brothers catching the wild dogs as a young kid and killing them. Life on the farm wasn't always a beautiful thing. So my grandparents that were my fathers that lived next door to me, they were Granddaddy and Mommy, or Evelyn Beulah and George Myron. My grandmother was lovely, a really, really sweet woman like my other grandmother, and lived with a man who was a pretty despicable human being. She was an amazing cook. I remember the best fried okra I've ever had, and grits that I still have yet to get anywhere close to eating. We had fresh produce from the garden, and I remember being embarrassed that we didn't buy our vegetables from the store. Big, massive red tomatoes that were served with a big old dollop of mayonnaise on top. I still miss her meals. And one of the things I really remember about growing up was when we would have a fish fry. My grandfather and father and brothers would often go fishing in the Wakahuta River for redfish and would bring them back. And my job was to basically, and I remember it vividly, pulling up a stool next to the stove. And I was so little that my face was eye level with the pan. And it was a big cast iron skillet full of melting Crisco. And my job was to take a match and drop it into the heating oil. And when the oil was the right temperature, the match would ignite, and the oil would then sniff the match back out, or at least you hoped it would. And I just remember being so excited and screaming when the match lit that the oil was ready for the hush puppies and fish. So my grandfather, her husband, not so nice. We had a town alcoholic, I guess you would say, named Emmanuel Martin, African-American gentleman. I only knew him as Manuel my entire life because no one pronounced the E. He did odd jobs for my grandfather, working in the yard and the garden. And my grandfather was horrible to him and called him the N-word to his face and was really, really nasty. And I remember as a child wincing and knowing that that wasn't right. And I still feel guilt that I didn't stand up to my grandfather. But I knew it wasn't right. And how did I know at such a young age when all of the white people around me acted that way? A big part of it is I knew deep down inside I was gay and that I didn't belong in the big scheme of what this community was. And I think another reason was because of Nellie Stokes. Nellie was my nanny, and she took care of me until I was 5 and treated me like she was my mother and I was her own child. I look back at it and it's like a scene from the movie The Help. Like, she wore a white uniform and everything. I've recently found out as an adult that she negotiated her salary with my parents and insisted that she be paid above the table so that Social Security was taken out. The fact that she had the gumption and the knowledge to do that just says everything about her. I loved her so much that when my parents came home, I cried and pitched a fit because Nellie had to leave. And so they would let me go home with Nellie, and then an hour later my brothers would come and pick me up. And I remember spending time in her home and with her grandchildren and seeing the portraits of her sons in their military uniforms on the wall. All of her children were either in the military or received a college education. Her granddaughter Precious was my best friend, and I named my pony after her. I think that's one of the reasons that I saw life differently. If you continued going down that same road, you'd eventually get to my aunt and uncle's farm, Norris Cattle Company, owned by the, I don't think you'd say they're famous, but the Norris family who owned the Detroit Red Wings. It was a Brahma cattle ranch. I don't know if you know what Brahma cattle, but they're the ones we typically think of as being in India. They've got the big hump in their back. Well, I had a cousin who was born and lived on that ranch. He was 3 years older than me. And talking about the unspeakable, I never met him. I never spoke to him. He was just a portrait on the wall that I always looked at and wondered who he was and what he was like. When he was 3, he walked outside with a piece of buttered toast and dropped it on the ground. And the farm had recently been sprayed for flies with insecticide. So the toast landed on the ground and he ate it and pretty immediately was affected. living where we were was 45 minutes to the closest hospital, so by the time he got there, he was permanently brain damaged. My aunt and uncle tried to care for him for about a year, but quickly determined that they weren't able to do so safely, and he was institutionalized. And I remember they still had the remnants of his bedroom when I was little, with mattresses lining the walls so that he couldn't hurt himself. But it was never spoken about, and he was sent to an institution. He died a few years ago at the age of 54 in a group home. And I never knew him, and I never talked to him. And I never really talked to my aunt and uncle about him. It was just this person that existed outside of the realm of our normalcy. And his mother, my Aunt Jane, was my mom's sister. And she worked at the other major employer in Lowell, the federal prison. And she was an intake counselor. She actually did the intake on serial killer Eileen Warnos, if you know who that is. She eventually ascended and became a warden herself. But the prison, being within walking distance of our house, definitely gave us several escape stories that my family has told over the years. But the one that I remember is being in high school as a senior and getting a call to come to the front office. I go there and they hand me the phone, and it's my mom. And she's like, "Don't come home right now. They think there's an escapee in the yard. They're out there with the guns drawn and the bloodhounds, and they just don't want you to pull up in case they haven't gotten them yet." I like how nonchalant this is. Like, okay, fine. I get a call about an hour later. It's all clear. You can come home now. And we really thought that was that, until about a week later, when investigators came and started asking my mom's questions. Seems like this escapee knew a lot about us. He knew my name, he knew my mom's name, he was wearing my father's clothes, he knew that my father was battling cancer, and said my mom was just lovely and really helpful and fed him and really took good care of him before she sent him on his way. Make a long story short, after my mom testified in court and we got more information, he had been hiding in the laundry room of our home the entire time. While my mom was on the phone, back in those days you had a landline, so you parked yourself in the kitchen and talked the whole time, where she was recounting all of her children's troubles, her husband's battle with cancer, and all of that kind of good stuff. In fact, she walked through the laundry room to go to my grandparents' house to tell them there's an escapee out. So I just wanted to maybe bring some things up that I think are weird about my life and my childhood. Maybe you agree. And I'll leave you with just a couple of factoids that maybe will also help solidify that for you. I have cousins, one named Nangenia, or Nanny for short. I have another cousin named Dixie Lee, whose father, Lamar, proudly drove a car with a bumper sticker that said, "Don't blame me, I voted for Andrew Jackson." I have a brother named Rebel. My last name is Rao. And I celebrated the wrong birthday until I was 15. I needed a passport, so I had to get my birth certificate. My mom had the wrong day. And then tried to convince me to keep it on the wrong day so no one else would know. I didn't oblige, and today I have 2 birthdays. That's it. It's weird.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that story. Okay, we have one more speaker for you tonight. She's a professor in theological studies at the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts. Please welcome Dr. Kim Harris.
I want some grits and some oatmeal.
Amen.
One now, okay. Last week, I went to the Kirk Douglas Theater down in Culver City. And it happened to be the night when Kirk Douglas died. Now, I know for some of the younger people here, you know him as Michael Douglas's father. But some of us more seasoned people remember him in Spartacus and things like that. And that night we had a Hollywood moment, because at 10 of 8, before the play was going to begin at 8, at 10 of 8 we went outside and the marquee was dimmed. And then they brought it back up. A Hollywood moment, a theater ritual. I was there to see a one-woman play called Until the Flood, and that was about the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. It was an incredible play, but what really stood out to me was the set. Because the set for the play was made like the memorials that people put out these days. You know, in class we call that pop-up sacred space. And so the stage was filled with balloons and candles and teddy bears and pictures of Michael Brown and things that, and it was amazing to see that and to think about that as all these stories were being told. I talk about things like that with my students. You know, how do you remember someone? And that idea of temporary or pop-up sacred space. We think about, in the classes I teach, we think about ultimate questions, life and death, memorials and rituals. We discuss them, we think about them, we reflect on them, and we speak about them. But what is unspeakable is to receive an email from someone you don't know that says, please contact me about Stephanie Sloan. Now, Stephanie was my best sister friend for 42 years. She was the one that I would text every single day. How's it going? What are you doing? What's happening? I look forward, I'll see you, in a few months. That was Stephanie. I'd been trying to text her and hadn't received any message back. So it was strange, but not, to receive that unspeakable email. I called the person back, and she told me that the night before, Stephanie had passed away in her sleep. I know the person she was talking with that night. It was someone else who was a mutual friend, and this other friend told me that they had been on the phone for a couple of hours having a great conversation, really having fun, until the other person's husband said, "Don't y'all both have to go to work tomorrow morning?" And so they got off the phone, and sometime after that, Stephanie died. And when I heard this news, sitting on the couch over on McConnell Avenue in my place, when I heard this news, all I could say was, I can't breathe. I still can't breathe. Because this was just on January 15th, not that long before right now. I met Stephanie at a folk music concert in Philadelphia. In that group of about 50 people, there were 3 black people. And the 3 black people that were there, we found each other at the end of the concert. We said, "Who were you? You like folk music? What? Let's stay in touch. Let's be friends." Now, this was before Facebook, so let's be friends meant you actually had to write the person's name and number down and keep in touch with them. Some of y'all remember that time. Stephanie was an advanced practice psychiatric nurse. And she moved from Pennsylvania to Connecticut because in Connecticut, an advanced practice nurse can hang out a shingle, have their own practice, work with the patients, their clients, and prescribe medicines. And Stephanie was great at that. She knew her stuff, so much so that Yale hired her to mentor nurses coming through school. Stephanie didn't take any stuff. So to get this message, it felt so unbelievable. It still feels unbelievable. I flew back east as soon as I could. And I flew back into New York City, and then I took the train to New London, Connecticut. And I was looking at it goes right along the coast, so I was looking at the water there, got to New London, saw the dock, and then I got in a lift and went up to Steph's house. And at her house was her family, and a very small family, which is partly why I had to go back. And her family and one other friend, there were just a couple of us, we went to the funeral home and we identified her body and made plans for her cremation, which is what she wanted. And then we went back to her house. Now, I loved Stephanie, but let me tell you, that woman had way too much stuff. So we spent the next 5 days, and we didn't get it all done, trying to clean out her house. Brought a couple of her things here. Let's see, we got Cookie Monster. We got a couple things going on, because I had to have a few things to take with me back down here. And then, 2 Friday nights ago, our small group gathered on the dock in New London. We were right on the end there, and we had a small wooden box. The funeral home said, normally they give you back somebody's cremains in a plastic bag, but we're not doing that. So they gave us this beautiful little box with a plaque on it, said Stephanie June's Song. And we were there at the edge of the dock, just in a small circle, and at the other end of the dock was a police car. I figured they were there because other things would happen on that dock at night sometimes, and we were there just at sunset, so they were just kind of looking. Now, in Connecticut, it is legal to scatter ashes. So there we were in a circle, telling stories, singing, saying the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Somehow we were all saying it in the King James Version. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And then her nephew leaned down and scattered her ashes, and the water took them out to sea. It was a beautiful sunset. The sun went down, and we hugged and held on to each other and started walking back. But before we got all the way back to the police car just sort of pulled off. And then I came back here to LMU. Glad to be back and getting into some kind of routine. Glad to be back to see my friends, my family, my housemates. Glad to hear the bells ringing, the Angelus. And when those bells ring, that first time is usually at 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning. And then there's a bell that rings at 8:30 at night. That's a remembrance of those who have died. and I find myself saying, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Every time I say that, I pray that somehow my prayers will retroactively go back for the hour of her death. I don't know how exactly to keep breathing when her earthly presence is no longer with me. And now she is my sister, friend, who is with the ancestors. And so I'll leave you with another Hollywood moment that kept bringing her to mind. Because the night of the Oscars, you know, when they do that memorial thing they always do every year, and they were showing people like Diane Carroll. Of course, they showed Kobe Bryant. And, of course, Kirk Douglas. Billie Eilish was singing. But all I could think of was my friend. Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the one I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Probably the only time Billie Eilish and I will ever be singing the same song. And yet, she will always be a part of what I think of. And that song will always be a part of what I think of. And all of your faces here will always be a part of what I think about when I think of Stephanie June Sloan. May she rest in peace.
Thank you. Let's keep the applause going for all of our speakers here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. It wouldn't be possible for the Dean of the Library, Christine Brancolini, didn't let us do this every year. So thank you so much. Thank you. And none of this would be possible without the hard work and efforts of the library staff here. John Jackson, Stephanie Greitz, Rhonda Rosen, and Carol Raby. Thank you so much. A bit of business. We do have surveys here that we put for you. We have to put it on top of the chairs because Oprah's ruined under the chair for anyone. Because we put it up, we say, look under your chair, so you're like, it's just a survey. Exactly. You get a survey. You get a survey. Everyone here gets a survey.
If you would please
fill out that survey for us. We appreciate that. Also, I don't do one more huge thank you to Henry Ward. Thank you so much for always introducing us to the most wonderful students. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Please hang out. What's that? Oh, sorry. Hey, hang out, everyone. Please come get some food, wine. Let's chat for a few. Thank you so much for being here.